This is Seat 1A. First class. It's a symbol of status, of luxury, of having made it. And on a totally routine flight from New York to San Francisco, this seat belonged to an 11-year-old boy named Liam Carter. He had his own ticket, a great window view, and was just quietly reading a book. But moments before takeoff, a flight attendant walked over, leaned in, and made a decision that would set the world on fire. A decision caught on a 30-second video that would eventually be seen by hundreds of millions of people. One boy. One seat. A $4.2 billion mistake. This wasn't just some customer service complaint. This was the story of how a titan of the airline industry was brought to its knees by a father who simply refused to let it go. It's a story about how one quiet injustice at 30,000 feet created a chain reaction that blew the lid off a toxic corporate culture, got a CEO fired, and ended up changing the rules for the entire industry. So, how did it get this bad? To really get the fallout, you first have to know the company at the heart of it all. Ascend Air wasn't just another airline. It was an American icon. For decades, they built their brand on reliability, prestige, and this image of premium, white-glove service. Their slogan, "Rise Above," was everywhere. They were consistently ranked as one of the best carriers in the world, a blue-chip stock, a true giant of the skies. In the cutthroat airline business, Ascend Air felt like a fortress, totally immune to the scandals and PR fiascos that seemed to constantly plague its rivals. On that fateful Tuesday morning, the fortress was about to be breached. The flight was completely full, your typical mix of business travelers and families. Liam Carter was flying with his dad, James, who was sitting just one row behind him in 2A. James was wrapping up a work call, headset on, totally focused before the plane pushed back. Liam, who was a pretty seasoned flyer for his age, was lost in a fantasy novel. By all accounts, he was the perfect, quiet passenger. But to one flight attendant, he just looked wrong. According to people who were there and the video that later blew up, a senior flight attendant walked right up to Liam's seat. She apparently saw a young black child sitting in a very expensive first-class seat and just made an assumption. Her tone was patronizing, loud enough for other passengers to hear. "Is this your seat, sweetie?" she asked. Liam, a little surprised, said yes and showed her his boarding pass, which clearly said, Liam Carter, Seat 1A. She wasn't convinced. She insisted there had to be a mistake, that the seat was probably reserved for some high-status flyer who just hadn't boarded yet. Her logic was a textbook example of implicit bias. She saw a child of color in a space she connected with older, white businessmen, and her brain just jumped to one conclusion: he doesn't belong here. The whole thing escalated. She called over a gate agent. Liam, who was now getting visibly upset, kept looking back at his father, who was still on his call, completely unaware of the drama unfolding. Other passengers started to notice. A woman in seat 2C later told reporters she was just stunned. "The boy was polite, he had his ticket, and he was being treated like a stowaway," she said. The breaking point came when the flight attendant told Liam he had to move to an empty seat back in economy. While they sorted it out. Humiliated, his eyes filling with tears, Liam finally got up. And at that exact moment, another passenger sitting a few rows back decided they'd seen enough. They had been quietly filming the whole thing on their phone. They caught the final, damning 30 seconds, the flight attendant gesturing dismissively, the boy's heartbroken face, and you could hear the whispers of disapproval from people nearby. The passenger hit stop, and just before the cabin doors closed, they uploaded it to social media with a simple caption. "This is not okay, Ascend Air. This boy has a ticket." That video was the spark. But the identity of the boy's father? That was about to be the accelerant. Before the plane even hit cruising altitude, the video was already on fire. That 30-second clip was pure viral dynamite. It was short, it was emotional, and it showed a clear, simple injustice. A huge, faceless company humiliating a little kid. The hashtag AscendAirShame started trending within an hour. By the time the flight landed in San Francisco, that video had over 10 million views. The internet became judge, jury, and executioner. Celebrities, politicians, and regular people were sharing the clip, all expressing their disgust. News channels started running the footage on a loop. The story was just irresistible. David versus Goliath, a young boy against a corporate monster. So, how did Ascend Air respond? Oh, badly. Their first move was a lesson in what not to do. As the internet burned, Ascend Air's PR team released a pre-written, lawyer-approved non-apology. It was one of those cold, sterile statements that just made everything worse. It read, Ascend Air is aware of an incident on Flight 715. We are conducting a full review of the situation. Our policies are in place to ensure a seamless and orderly boarding process for all our valued customers. The statement was a catastrophe. It didn't mention the child, it didn't acknowledge the obvious racial element, and it didn't even hint at an apology. The public read it for exactly what it was, a cold corporate brush-off. The backlash got even worse. People started sharing their own horror stories about the airline. The hashtag shifted to hashtag boycott Ascend Air. The company's stock, which had been doing great that morning, started to wobble. And it was in that moment of peak corporate arrogance that the world found out who Liam Carter's father was. James Carter wasn't just some dad. He was the James Carter, founder and CEO of Stratosphere Solutions, one of the biggest and most powerful enterprise software companies in the world. Stratosphere's software was the invisible engine running logistics for dozens of Fortune 500 companies, including a huge chunk of the airline industry. And guess who one of his biggest clients was? Ascend Air. Suddenly, the whole power dynamic flipped. This wasn't some anonymous family versus a giant company anymore. This was a titan of industry whose son had been humiliated by another titan. James Carter wasn't just a dad. He was a guy who understood power, leverage, and exactly how the corporate machine worked. And he was furious. When he got off the plane, James took his shaken son by the hand and made one, single, chillingly calm phone call. Not to a lawyer. To his own PR team. He then released a personal statement that was the exact opposite of the airline's corporate jargon. My son Liam was targeted and humiliated today on an Ascend Air flight. He was made to feel like he didn't belong in a seat that was rightfully his, a seat I paid for. This was not about a boarding process. This was about a child being judged by the color of his skin. Ascend Air's statement is an insult not just to my family, but to every person who has ever been made to feel less than. As a father, I will not stand for it. And as a CEO, I promise there will be accountability. It was a declaration of war. Carter didn't just ask for an apology. He demanded a complete overhaul. He immediately announced that Stratosphere Solutions would be reviewing its massive, multi-$100 million contract with Ascend Air. Then, he started calling other CEOs in his network, many of whom also used Ascend Air for their corporate travel. He was systematically and brilliantly dismantling the fortress from the inside. He wasn't just hitting their reputation, he was going straight for their bottom line. The inferno was about to become an explosion. Now, the story of Ascend Air is a powerful reminder of how quickly a company's reputation can be shattered. In today's world, protecting your online presence is more important than ever. That's why I want to tell you about our sponsor. The fallout was instant, and it was catastrophic. The next morning, Ascend Air's stock didn't just dip, it nosedived. When the opening bell rang, investors panicked. That toxic cocktail of the viral video, the terrible PR response, and the very real threat from a major corporate partner created a perfect storm. James Carter's influence was the tipping point. When a CEO of his stature says he's lost confidence, Wall Street pays attention. In the first 24 hours, Ascend Air lost nearly $1.2 billion in market value. But that was just the start. Over the next week, the crisis spiraled. Other corporate clients, spooked by the public outrage and getting calls from Carter's network, started publicly announcing they were reviewing their travel contracts too. The financial bleeding just wouldn't stop. The total price tag, when you add up the stock crash, the cancelled contracts, the coming legal settlements, and the long-term damage to the brand, was estimated at a staggering $4.2 billion. The company's board of directors, who had at first backed their CEO, now saw the company's very survival was at stake. Their fortress was crumbling around them. They called an emergency meeting. Just 2 days after the flight, Ascend Air CEO, a man who'd been running the company for over a decade, was fired. His replacement was handed an impossible job: stop the bleeding. The new CEO's very first act was a televised press conference, and it was the polar opposite of the company's first response. He was somber, direct, and deeply apologetic. He apologized by name to Liam and James Carter. He called the flight attendants' actions unacceptable and a betrayal of our values. He announced that the employees involved had been terminated. But James Carter had already made it clear that firing a couple of people wasn't going to cut it. He was pushing for fundamental changes to the company's culture, to make sure nothing like this could ever happen again. He argued that this wasn't about one rogue employee. It was the result of a system that let racial bias grow like a weed. Under enormous pressure, Ascend Air agreed to a massive set of reforms, negotiated in part with James Carter himself. This new set of policies became known informally across the industry as the Carter Protocol. First, Ascend Air had to completely tear down and rebuild its employee training. They brought in outside experts to create mandatory, intense, and ongoing training on implicit bias and de-escalation for all 90,000 of their employees, from the baggage handlers all the way up to the C-suite. Second, they changed their customer service rules. The power to remove a passenger no longer rested with a single flight attendant. From now on, any dispute involving a child would require sign-off from the captain and a ground supervisor, a system of checks and balances. Third, and this might be the most important part, Carter used his influence to push for industry-wide change. He lobbied for more federal oversight of passenger rights and discrimination complaints. His work was a major catalyst for what became the Dignity in Flight Act, a law that required standardized anti-discrimination training across all major U.S. airlines and created an independent group to track and report on these kinds of incidents. The Carter Protocol became the new gold standard. Other airlines, having watched the financial nightmare that Ascend Air went through, started adopting similar policies themselves. They rebooted their training and started treating diversity and inclusion not as a buzzword for a press release, but as a critical part of their business. One boy's humiliation had forced an entire industry to take a hard look in the mirror. So when you boil it all down, the story of Ascend Air is about more than just a corporate crisis. It's a story about power. The power of one video to hold a giant corporation accountable. The power of social media to give a voice to someone who otherwise would have been silenced. And the very unique power of a father who had both the resources and the determination to turn a moment of personal hurt into a movement for real change. So where are they now? Ascend Air survived, but it was a different, humbled company. It spent years rebuilding its brand and its finances, forever tied to that $4.2 billion mistake. The CEO who was fired never worked in aviation again. The flight attendant vanished from public view. James Carter's company, Stratosphere Solutions, did eventually renew its contract with the new and improved Ascend Air, a gesture that symbolized the new era. And Liam Carter, the boy from Seat 1A, grew up with a pretty powerful lesson about injustice and the importance of holding your ground. The whole affair is a stark lesson for today's world. When every phone is a camera and every customer has a platform, no company is untouchable. It really leaves you with a question: how many other incidents just like this happened before the cameras were always rolling? And how many are still happening today, just out of frame? The story of Liam Carter is a reminder that sometimes, the biggest changes don't start in a boardroom. They start with one person, in one seat, who is made to feel like they just don't belong. What do you think about this story? Have you ever witnessed something similar? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story interesting, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the stories that shape our world. Thanks for watching.